Hello, it's Silver. This is Hands of Necromancy 2. So as you would expect from the title, this is, of course, a direct sequel to the first Hands of Necromancy, and these are both FPS games made in GZDoom. Seeing a lot more GZDoom projects lately, which I think is pretty cool because, I mean, for a long time, the Doom modding scene has been in a really good place because of the power and flexibility of GZDoom and what it's allowed people to create. So I think it's really cool to see people stretching those limits and making entire games with it instead, and sometimes even being able to actually make money from their efforts. And another cool thing is that in this case you can see a lot of what they learned from creating the first Hands of Necromancy, because in this case you're going to be seeing a lot more advanced techniques being used in terms of map design. In fact, I would say, just to start off with, the map design of this game is probably its strongest aspect. It's got some really good level design. There are a lot of very large, sprawling levels, but there are also a good number of more linear, easier to navigate levels that aren't quite like, a Hexen hub level. And I think, honestly, this game took a lot of inspiration from games like Hexen, Heretic, and Hexen 2, and that is shown in the new playable character as well, because you have two different playable characters this time. You have the classic Necromancer from the previous game, and you've also got a new Witch character, and they both have a completely different set of weapons available to them with no crossover. You'll find that each slot has sort of a theme, but the actual weapons themselves can be very different in terms of how they're used. Overall, I would say the Witch is probably my favorite character. I played through the game the first time, all 3 episodes with her, and then I went back and played with the Necromancer to see how he changed and stuff, and they're both really fun to play. I would say the Witch is probably the more difficult character to play because a lot of her weapons deal more damage but are harder to use. They often work slower or have sort of an odd way that they function, and the Necromancer's weapons are a lot more straightforward and easier to use, but they often deal less damage. Weapon selection this time around is pretty good, especially considering you have 2 whole characters worth to actually choose from. Slot 1 is actually a melee weapon for both characters that you'll always have access to, just in case you run out, and especially in the second episode, you'll find that you're pretty starved of ammo, so you will get use out of things like this. The Witch has a dagger that can siphon health from enemies with its secondary, and the Necromancer has a sword, which is more powerful and has longer range, but that does not have the life siphoning effect, but can deflect projectiles instead. You also have your sort of bread and butter weapons, the ones that you're going to find the most often and find the most ammo for as well. Slot 2 is a fire weapon of some kind. The Necromancer has a fireball staff that shoots low damage but rapid fire projectiles that travel really fast and are easy to hit with. And its alt fire is a spread of 3 of them in like a shotgun pattern. And the Witch has a ring that fires larger fireballs that move a lot slower but deal more damage and have a slight splash radius to them. And its alt fire is like an arc of flame in the air that travels very slowly but does deal a lot of damage to everything it hits, and it's really useful for like rushing small enemies all coming at you at once. The third slot is an ice weapon of some kind. The Necromancer has an ice ring that fires piercing projectiles that can freeze enemies and cause like a short-range ice nova to appear whenever they hit, and its alt fire is like a freeze thrower kind of effect, whereas the Witch gets an ice staff that shoots quite powerful ice projectiles that do some damage over time on the ground, and its alt fire summons a big ring of like icicle stalagmites from the ground that do a ton of damage over time in an area around you, and it's a really good weapon to pull out when you're surrounded by stuff. Then you have the wind weapons, and these are actually quite similar to each other, but they are a bit different. The Necromancer gets a wind spell that fires forward tornadoes that actually drag enemies along with them and do continuous damage while they're in it. It has a pretty small area that it drags them in with, but if you're able to get them right in the middle, it does really good damage, and its alt fire surrounds you with a bunch of tornadoes that takes a lot of ammo, but can be useful in like a really bad situation. And the Witch instead gets one that's a lot harder to use, which is the Wind Orb, and it summons down a tornado that's stationary. It doesn't move at all, and it has more of an area that it pulls enemies in than the Necromancer's version, but it doesn't move, so you got to be really careful about how you place it, or else you're just wasting ammo basically. And its alt fire is a really large sort of lightning-y tornado that draws enemies in from a large distance and does a lot of damage. And then the weapons get more exotic from there, with more situational ones that are very powerful if you use at the right time, like some explosives. You will get some explosives at some point. The Necromancer has a sort of mine. It's a grenade, really, if it hits an enemy directly, but it will lay there like a mine if you miss, and can lay there for quite a long time before an enemy wanders into it. And its secondary fire turns it into like a napalm bomb with a whole bunch of like area denial effects. And the Witch gets a sticky bomb that actually sticks to enemies and then explodes and sets them on fire, as well as a cluster bomb on the alt fire. And then you'll get a black powder weapon. Interestingly enough, this is a new thing for the series. The Necromancer gets one of my favorite weapons in the whole game, which is a sort of shotgun pistol. It's like a black powder pistol that fires a burst, and it's a relatively narrow burst, so it's really useful. And its alt fire is a sniper shot. It uses twice as much ammo, but it's extremely accurate, even at long ranges. The only downside to it is you get to reload it after every shot. The Witch, on the other hand, gets a blunderbuss, which has a much wider spread and is your sort of classic shotgun-style weapon, but of course very slow to fire, and its alt fire is like an incendiary spread. And then you have the BFGs for each character, which you'll only start getting later on in the episode, of the first episode, and then you'll find them earlier in the other two. But the Witch, in this case, gets the Evil Staff, which is actually really fun to use. It's like a sort of chain lightning staff that fires these homing lightning projectiles. It does a lot of damage, and it just sort of leaves a long-lasting lightning effect that continues to damage enemies that go through it. Whereas the Necromancer gets the Scythe, which is actually my second favorite weapon, probably, because it's a lot of fun to use. It fires forward this piercing arc of energy that will pierce all enemies and also set them on fire at the same time. And both of these weapons also have a powerful enemy that's summoned as their secondary. For another queue from like Heretic and Hexen, you'll be finding lots of inventory items. You have quite an expansive inventory at the bottom of the screen. And you get to keep these between levels normally, except for one, which I'll get into in a minute. But there are all sorts of these to find, and this is often what the game rewards you with for exploring and finding secrets. There are things like potions of various colors that have, some of them actually have the ability to overcharge you up to 200 HP, which can be useful. There are other power-ups like invisibility, double damage, double defense, things like that, which are very situational, but you'll know when you should use them probably. One of the rarest things you can find is a life crystal that is usually in very well-hidden secrets, and it's pretty much the only place to find it, except for like one level I can think of that has it kind of obvious. But these will revive you when you die at full health back at the start of the level and keep all of your progress and stuff, so they're sort of like an extra life. There are also the titular hands of necromancy themselves, which are actual consumable items. The normal purple hand will revive a corpse that you're over and calls it to fight for you, so you can kill a room full of enemies and revive some of them and have them continue to fight for you. There's also a big hand of necromancy, which is glowing red, and it is like an AoE revive. It'll revive a whole bunch of enemies around you at once. These are really useful, and you absolutely should not underestimate them. They can make some of the arena fights in later areas a lot easier because you have a whole army with you. But another kind of unique thing about the game is that you're not only finding consumables, you'll also find these 4 spells that you actually get to keep whenever you have them. They're not used up when you use them. You keep them for the whole level and even beyond, most of them. And these are creature transformation spells. They turn you into some of the creatures that you'll be fighting. And you'll be able to use their attacks in combat, and some of them have some really powerful combat capabilities, but they're all also for unlocking new areas of the maps. The reason you'll be getting them is to progress to areas you couldn't get to before. So for instance, the Necromancer gets a snake, and the Witch gets a spider, and both of these allow you to fit in little tiny areas that you normally couldn't fit in your human forms. You'll also get one that allows you to break walls, you'll get one that lets you fly, and you'll get one that lets you walk on hazardous substances like lava without taking damage. And for both of the characters, the lava one is also the most powerful one in terms of offensive capability. And as you're probably guessing, this is where you encounter the one thing that you can't take between levels, which is the flying transformation. Whenever you complete a map, you'll keep all of your other items and spells and weapons and everything, but you will lose the flying transformation because, of course, just like how it worked in Hexen, where it also takes away your flying spell, you could basically sequence break all the future levels that aren't specifically designed around the ability to fly if you were allowed to keep it, so they take it from you. Which, let's be real, makes perfect sense, because if you got it, you would be able to break almost all of the future levels, basically, and that wouldn't be very good, so it's probably a good thing that they do this. Levels-wise, as I mentioned earlier, I think this is the game's strongest point. There's quite a lot of variety in the levels. Each of the 3 episodes has a lot of different terrain and tile sets and stuff that you'll go through, so they don't feel the same all the way through. You'll often have 1 or 2 levels that are based around flying that are really big and open and have a lot of extra areas to go, and then you'll have some that are based around like swimming or avoiding water, maybe some that are based around like a map-wide puzzle that you need all the keys for, so it's sort of like a scavenger hunt, and there's just a lot of levels to choose from. And like I said, they also use a lot of more advanced design techniques, so you're going to see some really devious traps that you don't expect because they're using some of the more advanced ways to actually create levels in GZDoom. So you're seeing some really neat stuff, including some really unexpected traps and other bits. Like there's one level that's got some really cool stuff in it. It's got some pirate ships with activatable cannons that actually allow you to bombard some monsters and some beaches and stuff. And that same level also has a beach with all these enemies in these like water cylinders that are waiting for you. And as soon as you collect one of the keys, or rather you hit a lever that allows you to collect one of the keys, all of the water drains out and all of the enemies come down for you and stuff. And there's also a section later on where you have to break a wall with the transformation I mentioned earlier. And when you do so, it actually floods the rest of that area of the level. So it dynamically becomes an underwater space all of a sudden, which I actually didn't even know you could do quite like that in GZDoom, but it does work out. And so you have this sort of sudden underwater combat arena, and all of that variety is just one level, and there are 24 levels total. The quickest of those took me like 20 minutes my first time through, and some of the longer ones took me almost an hour, but to be fair, I was doing a lot of secret hunting and stuff because there are loads of secrets in this game that have some really, really good stuff that you definitely want to find, and many of them are really well hidden. As someone that considers themselves an avid secret hunter, I do it in like all games. This one has some really hard to find ones that I'll probably never find. But I was continually impressed going through the levels with how they look, how the maps are actually designed physically, but also with how they work, what kind of mechanics are actually being used in these maps to make them stand out, to make them different from each other. And you also have a lot of key hunting, which is of course a classic thing for this era of FPS that this game is hearkening towards. But you've got like 6 different keys to find, and very rarely will you actually see all of them in one map. Usually you'll only see 2 or 3 different keys, but it does a lot of things with the keys. At first it's the obvious, this is the serpent door, so you need the serpent key to open the serpent door. And it's really like direct, you know exactly what to do. But eventually you'll be finding that doors are not the only things that these keys open, and there are all sorts of levers and other bits that you need the keys for that will activate different parts of the level or open up previously blocked areas that allow you to get to new transformations to unblock other areas, and it's just a more complex progression through the maps. Pretty much all of these maps has a relatively complex progression. Pretty much none of them are just you run to get key A to open door A, which allows you to get to key B to open door B. Like, it's not really that linear. They have a lot more to them than that, and I think it's really cool how much thought has been put into the design of these maps. Also to mention, the music is really good. There's some unexpectedly atmospheric and good music going on in the background. I've liked a lot of it for a lot of the levels, especially the episode 2 and 3 music I found has been really good stuff. It's got a kind of spooky, wandering theme going on with it, especially areas like the Dark Archives, which have a pretty cool music track in them. So yeah, the music is actually, I wasn't expecting it to be quite this good. Not that I expected it to be bad, I just didn't think it was going to be much of a focus. But yeah, it's actually some really nice, solid soundtrack. Overall, I've had a really good time with Hands of Necromancy 2. I think it's a solid game, and it manages to do a lot with the GZDoom engine that is just satisfying to play through, but also has a good amount of callback stuff to like your Heretics and your Hexens of the world. And also it helps that this game is only $10. So twice the price of the previous game. $10 is a very fair price for the amount that's on offer here, I think, and is very easy to recommend to people because that's pretty cheap for 24 levels of this size and quality. So I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Hands of Necromancy 2 if you guys wish to check it out yourselves. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.